I think one of the most important issues facing Christianity today is whether we will allow this sort of celebration of incarnation, God in the flesh, to point not to Jesus as an exception to humanity and as an exception, in a sense, to the earth, but rather to see Jesus and to celebrate him and love him as a manifestation of what is truest in every human being and in every life form. I think it's on that issue that the very future of Christianity leans or depends.
Well, hello, and it is my very great honor to be introducing you today to John Philip Newell, who is an internationally renowned Celtic teacher and author of spirituality, who is calling today's world to reawaken to the sacredness of earth and every human being, as it says in your biog. Canadian by birth and also Scottish, he resides with his wife Ali in the eco village of Findhorn in Scotland. In 2016, he began the Earth and Soul Initiative and teaches regularly in the US and Canada, as well as leading pilgrimages, pilgrim weeks on Iona, which I haven't been on yet, John Philip, but I must, where you were also warden of Iona Abbey. John Philip has written over 15 books, including his award-winning publication, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, which we are using as our inspiration for today. I think I've lost my dust jacket, but anyway, and I initially reached out to John Philip for my autumn series. Our our community morphs, John Philip, from Lent to autumn to Advent. So, but our diaries have conspired very happily to bring him to into the community for the Advent series. Hence, I'm wearing my Christmas jumper today, which I've dressed up especially. And we will hope to touch on the seasons and the rhythms of creation as we go. But our launching off point is Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul. So, John Philip, welcome, what really warm welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon today.
Thank you, Brian. Very good to be with you. Thanks for the welcome.
Um, this 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 book is which you wrote in 2021, I believe,
Yes.
is the kind of book that I have. You start underlining pages of a book, and I quickly gave up because pretty well every line would have been underlined. It's been that much of a treasury, really, both of knowledge that you've gathered, but also wisdom. So thank you for it. And perhaps we might, dare I say, a sort of brilliant antidote to Celtic sort of tea towel spirituality, which is, some people might think of that when they think about Celtic theology or spirituality. Can I ask what was your personal reason for writing this?
The the Celtic lineage of wisdom has been important for me for many years and sort of increasingly so. Um, I think that my sort of initial important exposure to it was during my university years in Edinburgh when I was studying theology. I came across at that stage a version of the Carmina Gadelica, this collection of prayers and poems that was put together by someone named Alexander Carmichael and published in 1901. These are prayers that belong very much to nature's cycle, prayers uttered at the rising of the sun, under the whiteness of the moon at night, prayers intoned or chanted at the birth of a child, the death of a loved one, prayers that would be recited in the kindling of the morning fire and the smooring or covering of the fire at night. these prayers struck me deeply as belonging not to a sort of limited religious use or context, but prayers that spoke deeply into the mystery of nature and its rhythms and seasons. So that was my initial exposure. And then Ali and I, my wife and I, became wardens or leaders of the Abbey community on Iona. And it was in that context, and especially through my relationship with George MacLeod, who was the founder of the modern day Iona community, I began increasingly to see that in this ancient lineage of wisdom, there were some important things for this moment in time.
Mm,
Uh, Particularly because the Celtic tradition so honors the sacredness of earth and every life form and every human being. And back in the late 80s, early 90s, when we were on Iona, eco consciousness was more and more growing. We were becoming more generally attentive to Earth and our relationship with Earth. And I realize here, deep within our Christian inheritance, is a rich stream of seeing that I increasingly felt needed to be brought forward to serve this moment in time. So that's the sort of deeper history to
mm,
what led to the writing of this book. And then for a couple of decades, I've been accessing Celtic wisdom in my teaching and in my writing. One of my earliest books was called Listening for the Heartbeat of God, and that draws from a cherished image in the Celtic world of John the Beloved leaning against Jesus at the Last Supper. And in Celtic legend, it really came to symbolize the practice of inner listening, listening deep within ourselves, listening deep within one another, listening within every life form for the
mm,
beat of sacred presence. Um, and so that was an important early book. But then, 20 plus years on, I felt I want to write a much more sort of definitive piece on Celtic wisdom for this moment in time. And, by that stage, there were some other characters that I wanted to add to the narrative as well. Very important figures like Bridget of Kildare, for instance, and realizing that by Celtic, I don't think we should mean limitedly Scottish, Irish, Welsh, Cornish, but that at one stage the Celtic world spanned the whole of Middle Europe and taking in ancient Gaul or ancient France as well. So I include a French figure as well in Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul,
mm.
seeing him also as expression of the Celtic. So that led finally to the writing of Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, and the title says it all. I think this is a tradition that if one is to put it in one sentence, it believes in the sacredness of Earth and the sacredness of every human being.
What do you mean by sacredness? How would you define that?
One of the reasons I wanted to use the word sacred is that I don't think it belongs just to the sphere of religion or religiosity. I think the word sacred, uh, one comes across, people speak about sacred moments, for instance, and it's also used sort of within the four walls uh, of religion. So I was wanting a term that sort of spans both the realm of religion and the realm of spirituality more generally. And I think most simply by sacred, I'm speaking of God. Uh, so when I speak of sacred earth, I'm wanting to say that the essence of every created thing is of God, and that the essence of every human being is of God.
Mm,
I think that's how I would want to put it most simply.
beautiful. And the earth being sacred is not just an idea, is it? And I think this is what, what I love about kind of what weaves through your book, um, that we have to shift from the realm of ideas into a much deeper knowing. Um, uh, the earth is something, the sacredness of the earth is something we encounter, isn't it? And I wonder how you began to encounter this sacredness in a way that went beyond thinking, beyond an academic idea.
Yeah, I think one of my convictions is that uh, the language and perceptions of spirituality need primarily to awaken us to what we already at some level know. And so I would look back into my sort of early childhood for a type of deep knowing of sacredness of earth. Uh, I think I was a somewhat dreamy boy at different stages. Just looking back, I think I sort of uh, got a bit lost in wonder, the wonder of earth, sea, and sky.
Mm,
And so I have memories of sort of being sitting somewhat lost in wonder up in uh, uh, northern Ontario in Canada, where we spent our summers as a family. So lost in wonder at the starry skies, or lost in wonder when we'd be up there in winter at the silence of the landscape and the whiteness of the landscape. And those experiences continued, even though there's so much in our culture that uh, doesn't readily nurture or encourage uh, meditative experiences of wonder of earth. But I know that those experiences were repeatedly with me.
mm,
I know looking back that I felt more well when I was in a natural context, when I was sort of living, breathing, hiking, working in in um, in the context of nature. And so it wasn't until I was beginning to study theology in Edinburgh in the late 1970s that I began to find some language to give expression to what those very early life experiences had been. And I love that aspect of what spiritual wisdom can be. I
mm.
think it's so important in terms of how we communicate with one another as friends, and as brothers and sisters, how what my work as a writer and teacher in spirituality should be. I think it's important always to remember that my job, um, and our job for one another is to try to offer language that simply awakens a deep knowing, because I think when we wake up to certain truths, our deep realization is, I knew this,
Yeah.
and what this language and what this teaching is offering me is not something foreign to my deepest experience. It actually gives some language, gives some articulation to what some of my deepest experiences of life have been.
And and it takes us beyond words, doesn't it? I led a group round a labyrinth in Devon under the light of the full harvest moon, and it was an extraordinary experience, as you can imagine, an extraordinary collective experience that we did in silence, in moonlight and otherwise darkness. And I realized about 3 weeks later that I was still feeling different, and I was feeling different after and I was thinking, why am I feeling different? And then I remembered that for 3 or 4 nights over that week in which I was leading retreat, um, we had walked the labyrinth by moonlight, and can you put your finger on what it is that happens there? I mean, is that a homecoming in terms of the knowing that in the soul?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it. Um, I think one of the sort of writers that I've appreciated, I think he is one of the sort of wisest figures in modern awareness, is the founder of um, analytical psychology, Carl Jung. And I love the way he speaks about moon-like consciousness
Yeah.
on one hand and sun-like consciousness on the other. And he sees that we need both of these ways of seeing. So what's it like walking under the sort of bright light of midday? And I know that when I'm walking under the light of the sun, I'm much more ready to speak about the particularity of what I'm in the midst of. I'm much more ready to speak somewhat analytically about the parts that are all around me. Sometimes, of course, not just in a scientific, analytical way, but it can be in a poetic and appreciative and spiritual way. But I know when I walk under the moon's light, I'm I, I move towards a type of speechlessness, because I think what the moon's light invites us into is a knowing of the mystery, a knowing of the essential interconnection, interrelatedness of everything around me. And I'm much more moved into that realm of sort of an awe-filled silence. And it sounds like, that's part of what you were experiencing. And I think that those experiences change us. I love what Martin Buber, the great Jewish thinker, says. He has this very simple, this utterly simple thesis that he explores in the book I and Thou. And by the thou, he is pointing to the one who is beyond names, but whom we often refer to as God. But he says that when we have an I thou encounter, whether I experience the thou in you or in a tree or in the sea, he says we're encountering what cannot be in any sense reduced to language or to expression. But he says one of the features of a true I thou encounter is that it changes us.
Right.
Um, and in a sense, that's how we can measure, if that's the right word, but that's how we can more clearly identify in our consciousness that we have encountered the holy, we've encountered the sacred, because it's more than um, uh, just seeing something or naming something, because it invites us into relationship with the one who is at the heart of all things.
Oh, thank you. That's really helpful. Can you tell me a little bit about place and the Kel? We'll get onto the very specifics of the book in a moment, but I'd love to know about your understanding of place, especially because you were on Iona and you return regularly, and people might refer to it as a thin place. I know that many people in our community love the the place. If for those of us like me who've never been, what is it about a place like that, and where does place come into Celtic theology and spirituality?
Yeah. Well, we definitely need to get you there, Brian. So let's work on that. Um, yes, I'm a sort of unabashed evangelist for people coming to Iona, and I'm always amazed, in my travels around the world. Often, of course, I'm referring to Iona, and whenever I do refer to Iona with a group of people, I ask for a show of hands who has been to Iona. And in October, I was in the high desert of New Mexico with a group of about 150 people. And when I asked them who had been to Iona, it was much more than 50% of the group. I mean,
Wow.
so so yeah, people, word has spread
Mm.
that Iona is, I think it was George MacLeod who first spoke about Iona as a thin place. And I think very importantly, he wasn't by that meaning that other places are thick. I think
Mm.
he was meaning that Iona is almost like a sacramental place where we more readily experience the thinness of the divide between heaven and earth, or between spirit and matter. And certainly for George MacLeod, it very importantly did not mean, we all need to go to Iona and stay on Iona.
Mm.
He saw Iona as a place that could nurture our souls, a place that could further inspire us to look for the thinness, that thin veil that divides time from eternity, heaven from earth, to look for it everywhere, and to serve it everywhere. Because for George MacLeod, the important thing was not about everyone going to Iona, but looking for inner strength of soul to serve in the challenging places of inner cities, or to serve in the places in which people were hungry or homeless, or to serve in collectively in our nations for ways of nonviolence, and for someone like George MacLeod, nuclear unilateral nuclear disarmament. It was something that he was very passionate about. But all of these actions he saw as stemming from our experiences of the sacred, and Iona is certainly that. So I mean, places is very significant in the Celtic tradition. I'm always amazed at how these Celtic monks from early centuries had an eye, or was it a nose, or what sort of sense was it that led them to identify, places like Iona and Lindisfarne, many other sort of beautiful Celtic sites. And I don't think the answer is straightforward, because I think it wasn't just the Celtic monks discovering the thinness of a place like Iona,
Mm.
because part of what we see in the very early Celtic Christian period is that there was an openness to learn from the pre-Christian. And someone like Columba of Iona, the great saint who is celebrated on Iona from the 6th century, he refers to Christ as his druid. And this is a very sort of simple but profound way of Columba honoring the wisdom of the pre-Christian period, the Druidic wisdom of the harmony of the spheres and the heavens, the Druidic wisdom around the healing energies of plants, the Druidic insights into both the sacred feminine as well as sacred masculine, and so on. So people like Columba didn't see a radical discontinuity between Christ wisdom and pre-Christian spiritual wisdom. What they saw in Christ was a bringing that wisdom to greater fullness, to greater expression. Something of which we see in Palestine in the earliest Christian centuries. Christ is seen, in a sense, as a New Testament. In devotion to Christ, they weren't denying the wisdom of Hebrew scriptures and that whole tradition, but saw Christ as taking it further forward. Something similar happens in the Celtic world. And one of the things we know about Iona is that it was a holy island before Columba in the 6th century. It was very clearly a Druidic holy island. During my time at the Abbey, there was an archaeological dig done on the Vallum Wall, which was the wall that would have surrounded the Columban community in the 6th century and following. And now in many places, no more than a bit of a raised bump in the landscape. And we were all expecting the dating to come back to 6th century
Yeah.
approximately. It came back at about 250 BCE.
Whoa.
So there's archaeological evidence that a site like Iona was being used for spiritual and monastic purposes long before the Christian period. So it's not quite as simple as saying, how did these Celtic Christian monks discover thin
Mm,
places? Because part of what was happening, I think, was this honoring of pre-Christian insight about um, a thin place like Iona. And then I think the other thing that doesn't make it sort of easy to identify exactly why a place like Iona ends up being experienced as thin is that I think that there's a sort of accumulative um, energy about places. And the fact that the people have been going to an island like Iona for hundreds of years, um, and often going with deeply open hearts, with sort of searching spirits. Um, Things happen uh, among groups of people when they arrive in such a deeply open and receptive state. And I think that there's a sort of a cumulative energy around a place where that happens. So that I think that that's part of it as well. Um, I'm not. I don't claim to understand in much detail the whole sort of ley line theory of places of special energetic intersection on the planet. But someone who is more familiar offered me a type of analogy that I have found quite helpful, and they said, the body. The human body is this sort of amazing form, amazing reality. And there are places of particular sensitivity where energies sort of intersect in the body. And so this person said to me that this body of Earth is somewhat similar.
yeah.
There are these places of intersecting energy. But whether it's ley lines or not, I think I think that the test of a thin place again comes back to whether we have in those places an encounter with spirit, a sort of encounter with the one from whom all things have come, and that's certainly true of Iona.
Wonderful. You sold it. You sold it.
Good. Okay. Well, I'll look out for you.
um, you mentioned the body, and the second part of your title is sacred soul, and I'd love to ask you what your understanding, what the Celtic understanding of the soul is, because it seems to me that we pulled matter and spirit away from each other, and there's something very important about that relationship, isn't there, between between our physicality and our so-called sort of spirituality that creates something greater than the sum of the parts?
Yeah, yeah. So I think to put it most simply, I think what we tend to get in a lot of Western Christian thought, certainly, and in the dualistic context of the West generally, is the sense almost of the soul inhabiting the body. And that's not how these great Celtic teachers are pointing to the soul. I think it would be truer in this sort of lineage of wisdom to say that the body is suffused by the soul, um, which is a way of again wanting to resist the dualism and the divide between spirit and matter in our world. So there's a real reverencing of the body and a sort of body knowing, and that is because the soul or that essence which is in us and is of God um, uh, suffuses every part of your being, every part of my being. So my ears, my eyes, my no, the senses are celebrated in the Celtic world as not just physical realities, but spiritual realities as well. So inviting us to know the sacred, um, uh, not in ways that are in any sense divorced from the body, but in and through the body.
Beautiful. You say that in the Celtic tradition, it's not about beliefs and doctrine so much as what our soul already knows, yet we suffer from soul forgetfulness. Um, that's more than that's more than just trusting your gut, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that part of it I think it's John Scottish Eriugena, the 9th century, who uses the term soul forgetfulness. And I think by that he's meaning that we have forgotten or fallen out of relationship with our essence.
Right.
And it's very clear in the Celtic world from as early as the 2nd century. We find an emphasis that God has not sort of fashioned the universe, including the human body, out of nothing. This doctrine that was promulgated in the 4th century when Christianity became imperial religion. One of the first doctrines that was put forward at that point was the doctrine of creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, in which it was taught that a transcendent being fashioned the universe, all things, out of nothing. And the Celtic tradition has always wanted to say that the cosmos, all things, have not been created out of nothing. And as early as the 2nd century, they use a phrase that still shocks our dualistic Western ears when it is said that we and all things have been created out of the very substance of God,
Mm.
which is to say that this stuff, the stuff of the human body, is sacred stuff. Um, and how we handle one another in relationship is a sacred matter. How we care for the most physical needs of those who are hungry and homeless and seeking shelter and sanctuary in our nations. These are sacred matters, and how we handle the matter of the body of earth with reverence and with a vision for justice and equity. These are sacred matters. So big implications to saying that everything has been fashioned out of the very substance of God, or that we have been made not simply by God, we are made of God. And so I think when someone like Erugena is speaking about soul forgetfulness, he's not just speaking about some dimension within us uh, that may be considered spiritual. I think he's speaking about the whole of our being as both physical and spiritual, and that we have forgotten what our essence is and what the essence of every life form is. And of course, the more we forget our essence, then the less we treat one another and the less we treat ourselves with reverence.
And
Um,
and that
and
has huge political implications, doesn't it? And you know, many of the figures in your book, starting with Pelagius, are pushed to the outside. He's declared a heretic for holding those beliefs. So this is not sort of floaty, airy fairy kind of new agey,
yeah,
fridge magnet stuff. It has very profound earth implications, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah, that's right. These teachers, and it's interesting. I mean, I look at nine great Celtic teachers in Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, and uh, nearly all of them were either excommunicated or deposed from the ministry or pushed out onto the fringe as sort of dangerous or as not convenient to the holders of power, whether political or religious. So yeah, there are big implications to saying that everything has been sort of fashioned out of the substance of God, um, because it immediately challenges how we are relating to one another, how we're relating to the powerless, how we're relating to Earth and Earth's life forms. Um, so uh, not at all uh, to be confused with a type of spiritual mysticism that just likes the experience of encountering the mystical in one another or in Earth. It's a very grounded tradition in terms of and in terms of its history and where it takes us.
Mm, mm. That's something that just sort of flows through the book, the groundedness of it all. I'm just wondering, just looking through through the list of those nine figures, and kind of what stands out for you as you think about some of those figures that you've walked with. I mean, you people like, is it would you say Brigid or Bridget?
Bridget, yeah,
Bridget,
Bridget
yeah.
is,
I mean, my birthday falls on February the 2nd, Candlemas. So there's this whole kind of time of the year where she's associated, and it was only until very recently that I discovered kind of all the wonderful layers that involve that particular time of year and her within it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think Bridget is an interesting example of someone who's rising in our consciousness again. Um, and I think it's because we need her. And and I think there's an interesting correlation between these figures and these teachers who rise up into our awareness, often, precisely when we most need them. And I think that's happening with someone like Bridget. And I think it's interesting that Ireland has finally got round to sort of recognizing her as the saint of the nation, or allowing her at least to share an equal place with Patrick, um, because I think this there's something about Bridget, particularly in this sort of male-dominated world with so much shadow masculine energy, both religiously and politically, over the centuries. Um, this this beautiful expression of the divine feminine in Bridget is something we're desperately needing to come back into relationship with. And one of my convictions is that what we've done to the body of Earth is again and again what we've done to women, and the subordination of the feminine
Mm.
has gone hand in hand with a sort of subordination of Earth, or not properly reverencing Earth. So I think to come back into true relationship with Earth uh, um, means in the same breath coming back into true relationship with the feminine, and deeply honoring women, and honoring the need for their place in leadership within our societies, within our nations.
Can I ask you how we how we actually ground this? I mean, you're doing your work with the Earth and Soul Initiative and raising awareness of the. I mean, this book is an absolute treasury, and we could talk for 3 hours about all the various nuances, but um, in terms of actual practice, in terms of grounding this. Um, where do we find ourselves? Because I'm also struck that the Christian church is sitting on an absolute gold mine of spiritual riches, which it is almost deliberately pushed to the edge, but then so many of us have just forgotten about.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the Celtic tradition has been pushed, if not entirely out, often to the edge. And I think one of the things that we're being invited to be aware of is that the edge is often where the new center is to be found. Uh, or I remember not long after the last presidential election in America, when many of us were sort of dismayed by how a nation could elect a man who so disregards the feminine, and and is so ready to disregard or exploit Earth. I think many of us were feeling really sort of dismayed by what happened in that presidential election, in terms of its implications for the world, not just for America. And I remember speaking to a wise old fellow up here in Findhorn, and saying to him, "Where's our hope to be placed?"
Right.
And he very clearly said, we need to place our hope at the edge, not at the center. Not in the centers of power, politically or religiously or culturally, not at the center, but on the edge. And we need to commit ourselves to working for real change, real integrated change at the local level and in our own lives, and allow that to increasingly affect the whole. And a few days after that conversation, I was um, teaching a class via Zoom, and I was referring to this wise old man, and said, let's commit ourselves faithfully and with integrity to how we believe and live and interrelate at the edge. That's something we can do, and we may not be able to touch or really affect the sort of centers of power in the world. And in attendance at that gathering was an evolutionary biologist, and she said, "Oh, that's very interesting, because in evolution, change always happens at the edge. It's sort of at the edge of a species that there will be adaptation to the new unfolding evolution of Earth. and it's from the edge of a species that change sort of moves towards, eventually being the norm for the species. That edge that is more ready to adapt, more ready to change. Um, and I'm doing a lot of thinking about edge at the moment and over the last number of years in my life, because I chose to relinquish my ordination as a minister of the Church of Scotland, feeling I could no longer sort of reconcile what I'm teaching and writing with some of the sort of historical creeds and formulations of belief that have come down in Western Christianity. And that has made me realize I'm operating much more at the edge, or to use the biblical image, I'm in the wilderness as opposed to being in the temple. And one of my realizations over the last couple of years is that that's a tension deep within our Judeo-Christian inheritance. And we find it right there in Scripture. We find the tension between the temple and the wilderness, or between the priestly and the prophetic. And the reality, I think, is that these two need one another. And yes, I'm on the edge in a sense of our religious inheritance. Um, but I think those of us at the edge, those of us trying to speak for change from the wilderness or from the edge, are being, invited, most importantly, to speak with love for the family from which we've come. Because I was sort of born and reared, given much love and wisdom around Jesus from within the temple, as it were, from the heart of that. And I think that, if the prophetic voice can't speak with love for the family from which we've come, it's better not to speak. So I think that these sort of um, um, reflections on where we speak from, where we live from, whether it's from the edge or whether it's continuing to try to engage with change from within the temple or within the political structures of today. I think if there's to be real change, there needs to be interaction from both within the sort of inside as well as from the edge. But sometimes it's those on the edge that uh, can point to the real heart of the tradition. Because sometimes what begins to happen in the center or in the places of power is that there's a losing sight of some of the sort of radical implications of Jesus's teaching, and some of the radical implications of um, of looking for spirit in all matter.
all, all, all of which I think would really encourage many of the people in our community who often feel on the edge but can't quite put their finger on it. Um, I, 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 I want to find out more about all of the amazing characters in your book. One that particularly resonated for me was Alexander John Scott,
Yeah,
partly because of his focus on um, moving from knowing about to knowing,
yeah,
partly because he talks about love so powerfully, and there's just a line I think that either you wrote or he, it comes from him, about the desire to access the his desire to access the powerful simplicity of Jesus's wisdom without having to consent to Christianity's convoluted propositional statements about Jesus, knowing the sacred rather than knowing about the sacred. People like him can give those of us who might feel alone on the edge great hope, I think, can't they? And
yeah,
people like you.
yeah, yeah. Um, uh, I think I indicate in that chapter, don't I, that I did my PhD research on Alexander John Scott, and he was a very little known uh, historical character because he wasn't a writer. He was first and foremost an orator. He was a great speaker, um, and I over my sort of three years of PhD research on Alexander John Scott, which took me primarily into the realm of personal letters between him and some of the great cultural and spiritual thinkers of 19th century Britain and Europe. Um, I felt so deeply sort of blessed to get to know this man, and by the end of my PhD, I was having encounters with him almost every night in my dreams, and so I was sort of accessing a different way of knowing. That's not to say I was sort of accessing historical knowledge through my dream life, but I think he was touching me at both a conscious and unconscious level. And I would say, I've never sort of written a page in my life that wasn't in one way or another directly inspired by Alexander John Scott. I mean, his life is a powerful witness to what you can do when you're out on the edge. And he had a sort of lucidity of mind and expression to give expression to some of the profound but simple wisdom of Jesus around love, and is a great articulator early on of the refusal to divorce spirit from matter and see earth itself as a sacred text that we need to learn how to read and to listen to if we are to know the divine.
Could I just ask you one last question?
Yeah.
Um, it's thank you for this beautiful conversation, by the way. It's very moving to listen to you speak about people like him. Um, we are now in the season of Advent. I wonder what advice you would give us for bringing ourselves to this season well. I mean, it strikes me that Christianity is at its heart about incarnation, the Word made flesh, and we often lose sight of that. But how can we bring ourselves to a season like this well?
I think one of the most important issues facing Christianity today is whether we will allow this sort of celebration of incarnation, um, God in the flesh, to point uh, not to Jesus as an exception to humanity and as an exception, in a sense, to the earth, but rather to see Jesus and to celebrate him and love him as a manifestation of what is truest in every human being and in every life form. I think it's on that issue that the very future of Christianity leans or depends. Will we allow our love of Jesus uh, to lead us to look for the divine at the heart of one another and every human being?
Hmm.
Or will we continue to give the impression that Jesus, at the end of the day, was an exception to humanity rather than the one who reveals our true essence?
Are you hopeful as a person in this mad, unsettled, unsettling time that we live?
Yes, I am hopeful, and that's part of my. I think that's part of my energy for for the way forward. I think it's a profoundly challenging moment that we are living in and through, both religiously and politically and ecologically. I think the challenges are enormous. We're living through a time of real danger for humanity and for Earth's well-being. But I think that something new is trying to be born, um, and and so the question is whether we get to be part of serving that new birthing. And I think sometimes it's possible to get very uh, disillusioned with the direction of the world, the direction of religion, and so on. Um, because who's getting the headlines, and again, this sort of leads back to our conversation of, well, it's the sort of centers of power that that
Yeah.
tend to be getting the headlines. But I think that something much deeper than that is trying to be born. And I think one of the ways of seeing the sort of falseness of power, power over earth or power over the feminine or power over against the powerless, is to see that those figures are in a type of fundamentalist reaction to the deeper thing that is trying to be born, and at some level they know it. I
Mm,
mean, at some level, I think they know, whether consciously very clearly or not, but I think that they know that their days are numbered because they're living a lie. They're living a sort of lack of true relationship with the beauty and dignity of the human soul, and they're lacking. They're living a lie in relation to the beauty and sacredness of earth, and to live a lie has no ultimate future.
mm, mm. Well, here's to the future, and here's to the present, and here's to all that you have brought to us today. We appreciate it very, very deeply. Thank you for being a sacred soul and a bright light in our firmament. I'll put links to all your work, retreats, and all of that below. But for now, John Philip Newell, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Brian, and I'll look out for you on Iona.
I'll be there.